Welcome, everyone, to the WILL studio at Illinois Public Media. I'm Sarah Edwards, and we're here tonight to celebrate the launch of WILL TV's upcoming documentary, Illinois Country, with two native Illinoisans who've had big-time careers in country music. We're thrilled to have them with us tonight. But first, here's a little bit about our Illinois Country documentary. Many people don't know that Illinoisans have played a critical role in the development and innovation of country music in the United States. For instance, did you know that Chicago was the center of country music before Nashville? The WLS radio program, The National Barn Dance, was the premier program for country music long before the Grand Ole Opry. Here's another interesting fact. A native of Decatur, Illinois, was the first woman to write a country music hit. We have a lot to be proud of in country music, and the Illinois Country documentary is a crash course you're not going to want to miss. You'll find out a little about how early country music came into the state from different parts of the nation. We meet artists like John Hartford and Robbie Fulks, who have been innovators in country music. And of course, we meet a few of our own superstars like Alison Krauss and Margot Price, David Lee Murphy, so many more. The Illinois Country documentary is coming your way in early 2020. Our guests tonight are they're both natives of Illinois, as I mentioned. Suzy Bogguss is a native of Aledo, Illinois. She's won Grammys, Country Music Association Awards, and she's had lots of top 10 hits. You might know a few, like Hey Cinderella, Drive South, and Letting Go. Suzy has released more than a dozen albums. One of her latest albums is a collection of American folk song classics. And if that's not enough, she's on a nationwide tour with country stars Pam Tillis and Terry Clark called Chicks with Hits. Andrea Zonn hails from right here in Urbana, Illinois. She got her start as a classical violinist, and then she got interested in fiddling. She's won fiddling contests all over the state and all over the nation as a kid, and she played in our local bands here. Today, Andrea is one of the premier fiddlers and singers in Nashville. She's played with a who's who of Americana and country music stars, including Vince Gill, Lyle Lovett, Alison Krauss, Amy Grant, Linda Ronstadt, and so many others. She's a longtime member of James Taylor's all-star band, and Andrea has released 2 albums. Her latest is called Rise. We're thrilled Andrea and Suzy made time to be here with us tonight. Please welcome Suzy Bogguss and Andrea Zonn.
It's me? Hi. Hi, everybody.
Have a seat.
Hi.
We all ended up in black, too. I mean,
I know.
almost, but we have enough color. I think
We
we're
do.
We joke on
We're
our,
trying to go with the background.
on our bus. We always say we're going to keep wearing black till they make something darker.
Black
Exactly right.
is great fashion for everybody. So you both got your start in music in very kind of different ways. Suzy, you told us a great story about a neighbor, Russ, who kind of introduced you to the adult side of music, and also you sang in choirs at church. And Andrea, you came from a distinctly intellectual, classical childhood. So just tell me a little bit about that. Suzy, you first.
Well, I grew up in this small town. My dad worked at International Harvester. And so he and his buddies all carpooled to work together, and they loved country music. And my mom was not so big on it at the time. So she, they was kind of relegated to the car. So I grew up listening to my dad's 8 tracks of Merle Haggard and Buck Owens and all these just wonderful artists, Ray Price, and really, I mean, a lot of them had some pretty technically difficult music, you know, when you really look at it and analyze it. But my next door neighbor really loved country music, and he would sit outside and he would sort of be the Pied Piper of the neighborhood. I grew up in that kind of a little town where all of the kids in the neighborhood would play all day long, and we would get tar on our feet because we didn't wear shoes, and we would have to go get cleaned up because we were getting ready for bed, and we'd have to get the tar off our feet with gasoline. And then we could go over to Russ Sanders' house, and he would play country songs, and we would get to listen to him sing and sing along with him. And he usually started out with the softer stuff like Little White Duck or some Burl Ives. And when he got to the Tammy and George stuff, our eyes opened really wide because we were like, so that's what's coming as you get older. You know, when you get to be an adult, you're going to see these kinds of things, bars and divorces and etc. But it was great because, for me, that just the whole, I felt like, just that feeling of community singing was already in my family because all of us sang in the church choir and stuff, and to extend it even farther into the neighborhood and have that feeling of, shared entertainment. I mean, it's like where I grew up, there was nothing to do really, except, you could, if you were lucky, you got to go to the Tasty Freeze, but seriously, there, that was a big deal for us to have that community share of music. So,
Andrea,
Well, you're right. I grew up in an intellectual, academic household where my father was a professor up the street at the university, and my mother was also a musician and a teacher. And growing up, I didn't know that people did other things, and I started asking for a violin very young because I'd been going to chamber music concerts and symphony concerts and had no idea that people didn't play at that age. And so it wasn't long before I started realizing that my technique and my ambition didn't really line up. And so I found fiddling through Wayne Logue when I was about 10. He was the luthier here in town. He had a great little violin shop and introduced me to fiddling. And I found that same sense of community in the fiddle community, all the folk musicians. There was as much going on backstage, jam sessions and whatever, endlessly as there were. I mean, it's the entertainment for the crowd. So.
Yeah, and that's something that really fascinates me is why country, and you guys have really diversified throughout your career. You've done pop, Americana, folk songs, but why country to start off with? Was it those early days with your neighbor and just the culture of fiddling? And
I think for me, I went to college. I went to Wesleyan first, and then I graduated from ISU. And I think that, a lot of it was I was impacted by people that I met, influenced by their styles. And at the time, a lot of the folks that I was getting familiar with as far as music goes, it was Emmylou Harris, and my friends were like beginners, so just like me. And so we played country rock, which was sort of the, brought me together with what my dad used to listen to and being cool. So I felt like, I was getting the best of both worlds by playing Neil Young and then, the Ozark Mountain Daredevils and John Prine and, but I think ultimately what drove me down to Nashville was lyrics. For me, it was, I love a great melody, and I love when a story is tied to the melody so that your emotions are, ultimately they come together, like you get the feeling from the music, and then you get the the double whammy when you hear the lyric and it's matched up so well. And I guess that's what drove me to Nashville.
Mm-hmm. Story songs. Is it the same, Andrea?
Well, and I think, I think a huge part of country and folk music is that sense of community. I'm trying to think of another art form where the people who enjoy the form participate as much as they do in country and folk music. And so I think there's that very tangible, real quality. Like you said, it's real stories. It's authentic, and I think that's the driving force, and that's why.
And it's also inclusive. Like
it
you were
is
just
inclusive.
saying, it's like that.
Right.
Lots of, like I said, like my friends were just starting to play, so we knew 3 chords. And
right. So at any
therefore,
level,
it sort of set our, the songs that we could do because we knew those 3 chords, and that was country.
Well, and there's also that simplicity that lends itself to any skill level. You can sing Amazing Grace as a beginner or as a seasoned,
Exactly.
Person who's been singing for 80 years, and there's all these varying levels of depths, but it's always a beautiful song. It's always got a purity. It's always got sort of the perfect melody and lyric the way they interlock. It's timeless.
Yeah.
And I think that's what pulled me into it, is just the simple grace of all of the tradition.
Tell me about you, Suzy. You mentioned a great turning point for you in college at ISU, where you were deep into jewelry. You loved making jewelry, and you kind of had a turning point where you decided, well, this is it. I'm going to pursue country.
Okay. Well, I think that my sort of revelation point was I had been really immersing myself in my metalsmithing classes at ISU. I loved gold and silversmithing, and I had a wonderful instructor who was, he was always there for us. Ed Nemi was his name, and he kind of understood that I was pulled in a couple of directions. And as time went on, I started to book myself further and further from Normal, Illinois, and I was working up in the Chicago area and stuff in these little folk clubs, wherever I could go and just make a little bit. It was not really just the extra cash at that point, but actually there was a drive in me that was like, I could do this. Well, I can, if I do that, then maybe I could do this, and each thing kind of led me a little further. And one day I came back to the jewelry lab, to the studio, and he called me into his office and he said, you haven't been here for 3 days. And it's Thursday, and I was just wondering how you're going to finish up that project that you're working on. And I just started tearing up, and he said, yeah, it might be time for you to decide whether you're going to be a jeweler or if you're going to be a singer. And I said, I think I'm going to be a singer. And I just remembered that he said it was fine. He just, he wasn't like going, wow, you spent all this time and you were promising or anything. He was just like, well, good for you for knowing what you want to do. So that was just, sort of an extra blessing on top, that somebody giving you the go do your thing,
Andrea, you had a story about calling Vince. Was it calling Vince Gill?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I actually was a student at Vanderbilt University and had been playing in my first touring band with Tony Trischka and David Greer and Harley Allen and some really lovely folks, and Debbie Nims. And I was so green and so young, and Tony Trischka had been touring for quite a while, and he said, "Kid," he said, "what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I just want to play music. I mean, that's all I want to do. I just want to play." And he said, "Well, don't feel like you have to be a purist and glued to bluegrass tradition, because, this is, you can always play, but you can't always earn a living. It's not lucrative." He said, "Don't be afraid to think about other things." And so I had no idea how you get a job with a touring artist, but I kept thinking, well, if I could choose who I would work for, who I would tour with and learn the ropes in a country tour, who would that be? And there was one name on the list, and it was Vince Gill. And I went and saw him perform, and he did not have a girl in the band. And if you know his records, they always have that soaring, gorgeous harmony. And through Harley Allen, an introduction was made, and I called Vince and said, "Hey, I know you don't have a lot of fiddle on your records, but I also know you have a lot of girl singing, and you don't have a girl in the band, and I think I could sing with you, and I'm the man for the job." He started.
So awesome.
That was his reaction too. He laughed, and he said, "Well, all right, kid, let's just see what you got." I was like 20. I mean, I didn't know you're not supposed to do that. His number was there in the Musicians Union book. I called him right up. But he brought me out for a couple of gigs to try it out, and we sang well together, and it started a long
That's
relationship.
So cool.
Yeah, but I would take time off from school too to go do that.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's a hard
school.
choice.
But I was just going to say, it's been so funny because Andrea and I have known of each other and known, worked with so many of the same people through years, and this is the first time that we've ever had a chance to work together.
And when I was with Vince all those years ago, it had to be, how many years ago? 25, 30 years ago?
Yes, when I was 8.
I was 8 too. Oh my God.
I know.
How is that possible? We are so young. But we did some shows together.
Yes,
But
we didn't.
then we didn't.
We didn't have time to get together because
Because you were all busy, like being Suzy Bogguss.
Well, no, we were driving 700 miles that next night. But I was just going to tell you that the first night that I moved to Nashville, the very night that I moved to Nashville, Byron Berline happened to be in town, and it's a long story, but Byron played on my first record I made in Peoria.
Oh my God!
As a friend to
So
another friend of mine. He didn't know me from Adam or Eve or whoever I am. But so anyway, so he was there in town, and he invited me to go see Peter Rowan at the
Station Inn.
At the Station
Had to be
Inn.
at the we were probably there the same night.
And so then afterwards, this is like 1985 or something like that, we went back to the Shoney's Inn where Byron was staying, and we had a jam there, and Vince came to the jam.
Because Vince and Byron were in a band. That was one of Vince's early bluegrass bands, was with Byron, and oh my God.
Isn't that the coolest thing, though?
It
There's so
is.
much of that circular stuff.
Yeah,
and even when it's a long time before you actually get to play together, you still have the best stories about all the people that you have
in common.
Yeah.
I think I'm just going to get off the stage and let these women
And then there was
chat.
this one
We're still
song
figuring out this.
At Illinois Public Media, we like to bring people together and bring
Well, we
stars
don't think
together,
it's
and
gonna
they
be
become
that
best
nice.
friends.
This might be our first time, but I don't think it's going to be our
No,
last
it is
time.
not going to be the last time, man. It was just just been too fun and too.
It has been.
So, Suzy, you developed, like Andrea with Vince Gill, a great relationship with Chet Atkins. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I met Chet the first time I was on television, and it's one of those crazy stories. But I had been hired at Dollywood the first season when Dolly first opened the park, and so I was the first headliner girl, and so it was a big deal. And because Dolly was promoting the park, she got us onto the Nashville Now show with Ralph Emery. And so my male counterpart, that was the first male singer at Dollywood, we came over and got to perform on the show that night. And it just so happened that Chet Atkins was also on the show that night. And I was sitting next to him on the couch, and he was trying to calm me down because I was shaking my legs like this, sitting on the same couch as him. So, of course, the couch was going up and down. And someone in the audience had given him a guitar-shaped fly swatter. And he smacked me on the knee and said, "You better calm down or you're not going to be able to, give your best performance." And it really, made me just go, he's right. I need to calm down. It's not cute. Don't be cute. Really do this right. And so we became fast friends. And then I went back and worked at Dollywood for that season. And I got my record deal while I was there. So I had made a 45 for Capitol Records when I was 8.
Oh, you're right.
And I brought it back to play for Chet, and he was so excited for me. And oddly enough, that my first single on Capitol Records was "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire," which is a very old song from the 50s, and so it just kind of deepened our friendship, and we split a Michelob and celebrated. Woo! It was wild.
I believe he hit you with a fly swatter.
He did, right on the knee, like whack. But we ended up being
Not everybody can say that.
Yeah, that's true. But that ended up being our whole relationship. As Chad and I always would make fun of each other, and we were like brother and sister. We were kind of mean to each other, and he always made fun of my shoes. He always thought I had like clunky, nasty looking shoes. My cowboy boots or whatever, and then we'd get ready if we were doing a show together. We'd get ready to go on stage, and he would, be getting ready to go on. And he used to do jumping jacks before he would go on stage. This is a little known fact. but it got his blood pressure up. But then he would get ready to walk on the stage, and he would slump all over and get ready to go out, and I'd just be like, stand up, you look like an old man. Stand up, man. So, so we were good friends.
So a final question, because this is Illinois country. What is it about being raised here in the Midwest? Maybe it's the culture, the people, your upbringing, the corn, the weather.
Pigs.
That you really take with you in your careers in Nashville. I mean, neither of you have lived here in a while, but you are native Illinoisans. So what is it about Illinois and being from this particular area that sustains you in your own careers?
I would say that my first taste of that sense of musical community was here, because my first violin teacher, Dorothy Martirano, is here somewhere.
Aww.
There she is. I mean, and we're still in touch, and I learned so much from Dorothy that carries till now, and I brought that to Nashville, and just that whole sense of sort of those circles, those intersecting circles, but they never dissipate. I mean, they just never do. And I think that was instilled in this community here.
Yeah.
Suzy?
I think for me, the same thing. It's like I remember so well my elementary music teacher and my high school music teacher. He always took on things that seemed kind of like pipe dreams at first, the kinds of musicals he would choose for us. And we would start out and he would pick people that were not in the choir. He'd pick a basketball player and say, you know what, I feel like this guy is the guy to play this lead in this thing. And he would teach him how to be an actor and a singer. And I just thought that was a beautiful thing to see, that it was inclusive. It wasn't just the same three people in everything over and over again. And there was only 400 people in our high school, so there was limited pool. Mm-hmm. So, but it was really, I just feel like I still remember that time, and I remember how it was an important part of our learning. Mm-hmm. That's why I ended up doing the folk project, was because I felt like I learned as much in my music class about geography and, the Industrial Revolution and all the gold rush and all that stuff from these great old songs as I learned in any of my other classes, even though I do know what a white dwarf is. So there you go.
Excellent. Okay, when we come back, Suzy and Andrea will perform for us live in the studio. But first, here's a little preview of the Illinois Country documentary coming to WILL early next year. Stay with us.
The WIS Barn Dance is on the air!
People think of Nashville as the country music center, and it is these days, but Chicago was in the early days of the 20th century.
In the 1920s, there was a rising interest in old-time fiddle music all across the country. 1924, one of the many new radio stations in Chicago that started was WLS. It was owned by the Sears Roebuck Agricultural Foundation. So WLS went on the air and said, we're going to service farmers. And so the second Saturday night in the station's existence, April 19th, 1924, they announced that they were going to have a national barn dance. In other words, they were going to bring some old-time fiddlers into the studio, broadcast their music, and it was going to go out across the nation. And they told people, roll your rugs back, clear the floor, and dance to the sounds of old-time fiddling coming out of your radio speaker.
To start things off, boys, let's really raise the roof. It's here with that old Alabama Jubilee.
Old-time fiddling was the first sound that became definitive for the National Barn Dance. But quickly it became a variety show. It included more citified artists as well as country artists.
And early country music was the rural hayseed hillbilly. But no boy wants to grow up to be a a hillbilly or a mountaineer, but every boy wanted to grow up to be a cowboy.
In the 1930s, cowboy movies became all the rage. The images of a cowboy and the freedom of home on the range worked perfectly with country music, and many artists began to adopt a Western persona. Gene Autry would lead the way.
Autry was in Oklahoma, so they bring him into WLS to start performing. He dressed like a cowboy, but he didn't sing cowboy songs really until 1933, and that is going to lead him eventually to Hollywood as the first singing cowboy star. Those singing cowboys popularized country music and made it national with a good image. Gene Autry needed a comedian to go as well as a musician as part of his show, his live show.
He said, boys, I need an accordion player. Can you do anybody to play accordion? He said, well, there's a guy down at Tuscola, Illinois. He plays accordion. It's pretty good. So, well, give me his phone number. So Gene Autry calls Smiley Burnett up on the phone. This is Gene Autry. I bet this is Gene Autry. Smiley kind of laughed, said, no, it is. I need an accordion player. Would you consider, I'll pay you so much a week, would you consider playing for me? Smiley said, I'll be there.
Gene Autry and Smiley Burnett became partners during the National Barn Dance, but their collaboration would become even more legendary in the years to come.
Autry had been trying to get into the movies, and he finally gets a call to be a guest in a Ken Maynard movie. And they're driving from Chicago out to L.A., and I think Smiley was asking about how much money he could get for a song. And so he's laying in the backseat of the car and writes Riding Down the Canyon, which is a classic Western song.
Riding down the canyon, watch the sun go down. Picture that no artist e'er could paint.
White-faced cattle lowing on the mountainside. I hear a coyote whining for its mate.
Smiley Burnett went on to have a great career in TV and movies after his years with Gene Autry. He would have a starring role in Petticoat Junction, Green Acres, and would make appearances on the Grand Ole Opry and the Louisiana Hayride.
The whole array of music that was heard on the National Barn Dance, of course, included a great deal of country-tinged performers. Some came from other states, some came from Illinois.
One of my favorites was Lulabelle and Scotty. They sang, Have I Told You Lately That I Love You, a great duet.
Another early performer in the late 20s was Pie Plant Pete. He was from Gallatin County in the far south of the state. He left behind a number of recordings from his days at WLS.
Made for that mound across the way, over yonder, over there.
Jenny Lou Carson, who was born in Decatur, Illinois, was a popular performer on the Barn Dance. She performed an act with her sisters called The Three Little Maids. In 1945, she became the first woman to write a country music hit. Her song Jealous Heart was recorded by Tex Ritter and stayed on the country music charts for 23 weeks.
Jealous heart, now I'm the lonely one.
With all the radio broadcasts, the live theater performances, the Touring Artists Bureau, the National Barn Dance was a dominant institution in what was becoming known as country music. A show started in Nashville in 1925, copying the National Barn Dance. There was an announcer from WLS who was hired by WSM in Nashville, George D. Hay, who had been the announcer on the early Barn Dance. So when he got down to Nashville, he started his own on WSM, and that soon became known as the Grand Ole Opry.
Welcome to Grand Ole Opry with Rod Brasfield, Minnie Pearl, and starring Red Foley.
WLS took a tumble in 1946 when Red Foley left and joined the Grand Ole Opry. The National Barn Dance sponsor was Alka-Seltzer, which got them on the network. And when they lost Foley, they lost Alka-Seltzer, they lost the network. So that was the beginning of the decline, of the sharp decline from Chicago being the center for country music.
It held its own ground, but the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville had gained a lot and had become quite a large institution. It lasted well into the 1950s with a lot of great performers. was on the air into 1960 when the station was sold, and the new owners of WLS were going to turn it into a rock and roll station.
WLS, the Windy City